Welcome. Thank you for joining our Laboratory Practice Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Diane Bleinzer, Senior Vice President Operations for USDM, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, Best Practices for Laboratory Compliance, Recent Trends in Warning Letters and 483s. The USDM team is proud to have Diane on the leadership team as Senior Vice President Operations, and she's been with the USDM team for 12 years and 24 years in life sciences. Quite a bit of experience there. Her background in quality control, analytical chemistry, quality assurance, validation, auditing, project management, and regulatory compliance is extremely valuable to our team. Diane is the director of USDM's Laboratory Practice Group. USDM is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing quality and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Santa Barbara, California, and we've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 300 life science clients. We're a preferred compliance partner for small, mid-tier, and large life science companies alike. Our various dedicated practices include IT and virtualization, GRC, ECM, ERP, PLM, EQM, manufacturing automation and equipment, clinical and drug safety, business intelligence, project management, quality and auditing, and of course, laboratory. In addition, we have subject matter experts on board to support compliance and the nutraceutical industry. The content today will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post questions for our team via the iLink message board on the lower left of your screen. Or you can join the discussion on the USDM LinkedIn group and post any questions for us there. We're happy to address any issues offline. Just shoot us a note at USDM at USDM@USDM.com. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Diane.
Hello, everybody, and thank you again for joining us today. Today we're going to discuss what are 483s and warning letters. I've had the occasion to go on site at certain companies, and people ask me what's the difference. What is a 483 and what does it mean? So we'll have a quick definition of that so we're all starting off on the same page. What are inspectors looking for when they go into a laboratory to do an audit, or they come into your company and the lab is a part of an audit? We'll look at the most frequent findings in laboratories. We'll look at how to avoid those findings. What can you do not to get a 483? And even more important, how do you avoid turning 483s into warning letters? So we'll also talk about how you should respond to a 483 or a warning letter. And then we'll sort of summarize and have a question and answer session. So the FDA conducts thousands of establishment inspections every single year, and they issue thousands of 483 observations. In 2010, the FDA issued more than 10,000 483s for the first time ever. In 2011, they issued one 483 every 50 minutes over the entire year. And in 2012, over 40,000 inspections occurred. And again, well over 10,000 483s. There's been a trend for the number of 483s to go up, and there's a number of reasons for that trend, but some of those are reflected by the number of pharmaceutical companies who are public, vectors, and the fact that there's lawyers, more and more lawyers are investigating and looking at 483s. The FDA has been questioned on a number of occasions as to why certain things were not found out and why certain things were not addressed before they became issues. So FDA is definitely issuing more 483s at this point in time. At the end of every inspection, the observations that the FDA finds during their inspection of your site, any regulatory violations that they've made, are shared with the most responsible party at the firm via a Form 483, and that's their report of observations. From the FDA's own Investigations Operations Manual, the Form 483 inspection observation is intended for use in notifying the inspected establishment's top management in writing of any objectionable conditions relating to products and processes or other violations of the FD&C Act and related acts that were observed during the inspection. A warning letter is the FDA's informal notice that you now have 15 days to set out the specific steps that you will take to correct any violations that have occurred and explain the corrective and preventive actions that you will take to ensure those violations do not occur again. Typically, a warning letter comes after a 483, not always. Warning letters typically don't get issued following an inspection unless a very serious situation is observed that is GMP related. If you have a clear and demonstrated failure to respond to previous 483s, then you may get a warning letter issued following an inspection. If you've got a pattern of repeatedly failing to make corrections in response to observations, so you've received a 483, you've promised to go in and fix it, you've told the FDA how you're going to do that, and you've failed repeatedly to do that, you may get a warning letter instead of a 483. Or if a risk to the health and safety of the consumer is very apparent to that inspector. Is there anything that can occur before 483, or after a 483 is issued, are you just going to get slapped with a warning letter? There are a number of different things that can happen. 483s do not always precede a warning letter, and a warning letter does not always come after a 483. There could be regulatory meetings. You could receive untitled letters. You could have a number of meetings with the FDA. You could receive multiple 483s. But again, it's that repeated pattern of not answering, not responding, or not fixing the problem that puts you in line for a warning letter. Once you've gotten a warning letter, the next things that can happen are injunction. They can seize your property, seize your company, seize your drugs. They can debar you. The FDA can prevent people who have been convicted of certain crimes related to the FDA's regulations of drugs and forbid them to ever participate in pharmaceutical industry again. That's debarment. Fines are a very common form of punishment if you don't respond to a warning letter. And then there's always the gray bar hotel, and there's always those designated people who are going to go to jail if it gets to that point. That's a pretty rare occasion that somebody's going to go to jail, but it happens. Looking over 483s that have been issued over the past 3 or 4 years has really shown that the FDA doesn't typically come in because your product failed or you got a product complaint and give you a warning letter. What happens is they come in for whatever reason they come in, and they find issues with the processes that you're performing, the procedures that you have in place that you follow to prevent defects. So the process of manufacturing and product acceptance is at least as important as the results. You may not have a product that failed. You may not have a customer complaint, but you may have a deficient process that eventually could lead to failure. And that's where you're going to see a warning letter or 483 issued. So what do inspectors look for when they come in? And especially, we're focusing mainly on the lab here, but They don't typically come in and just look at the lab. They come in and do a facilities inspection. And the lab is a big part of that because that's where a lot of your data is generated. So the main objective of the inspection is to see how you conduct your processes and whether or not you're operating in a state of control. And that's kind of the gold standard of inspection. That's what they want to see. Are you in compliance with local laws and with the regulations? Does management have a commitment to quality, and is that transmitted and communicated down to all levels of the company? If and when you have a defect, and defects happen, how do you investigate and fix that defect? How do you assess that it won't happen again? What controls do you put into place, and how do you change your processes to ensure that not only is what caused the defect fixed, but that you're going to prevent that from occurring again in the future? They're looking for training. This isn't just in the laboratory, it's across the board. But in a laboratory situation, we're looking for, are your personnel trained to do the job that they're doing? Do they have adequate knowledge, either in experience or previous training, to do their job? And is that documented somewhere? Documentation can be in the form of a CV. It can be training that they've taken. It can be on-the-job training. But people need to be able to be shown to do the job that they're doing. Excuse me. And in order to do that, you might think about creating a job description so that you can define the job that each person has. And that makes it a simpler matter to ensure that the training is updated and correct. For your laboratory equipment, there needs to be documentation and schedules for maintenance, calibration, cleaning, whatever is required for that piece of equipment. And you need to monitor your laboratory equipment. Anything that's involved in measuring, testing, storage of raw materials, product samples, reference reagents, you need to be monitoring temperature. You need to ensure that it's up to date on its maintenance. And you need to have processes and procedures in place that are followed for how to do the maintenance, when to do it, and who's responsible. Method validations. If you are running assays in the lab, how are they qualified before you run them? Are they validated with the equipment and reagents that are specified in the test method, or has someone switched something out along the way? If you change the vendor or you change the specifications for major equipment or for major reagents in your assay, you should revalidate to ensure that you're getting the same results. You need to show substantial equivalence. And for all the parameters that you set for your acceptance criteria for the assays that you run, you need to show raw data to support where those parameters came from. How did you establish the ranges? And how are you investigating any out-of-specification results? Are you trending the results that you get from the assays that you run? You need to ensure that materials and reagents are stored in the proper temperature and under the proper conditions. If you're using reference standards, make sure they're characterized and documented, they're stored properly, they're secured, and they are used during testing. You need to make sure that they are attributed to compendial standard, which is an ATCC lot number, and please don't have expired reagents sitting out on your bench. That's one of the first things people look for walking through the lab. If you use quality control samples, keep them segregated and properly stored. And they're looking for that your procedures are written, they're approved, they're applicable, which means that they must be current. A lot of times people go in and make changes to procedures, they don't follow them exactly, and if that's the truth and if that's now the proper process to follow, that document needs to be updated to reflect the current information. And then you must show evidence that people follow those procedures. When you use a computer system to control any laboratory function, then you need to document that the hardware is suitable for the task it performs, and the task it's performing is to connect with the equipment possibly, but it's also to support the validated application that's sitting on top of it. And when we say the hardware has to be suitable for that, that includes things like backup and restore. You need the proper IT processes and procedures in place to support that validated application as well as that hardware. So you're looking at backup and restore. When do you back up your data? Where does it go? Have you practiced restoring the data? What happens if the hard drive crashes? How do you replace that? What happens if you upgrade the operating system? How will that affect your actual validated application? All of those things must be proceduralized. You need to think about them in advance and have the proper documented procedures in place to address them. You need change management measures in place to initiate revalidation of application if you're going to make a change. So again, we talked about operating system. What about upgrading the software to a new version? Maybe you're upgrading third-party software. You need to make sure that you're doing an impact assessment, that you can make the test without interfering with the work environment. So you might consider having a test environment to ensure that you will not adversely affect the production environment of your laboratory software before it's tested and approved. Any critical software that you use, and that would be any software that controls, documents laboratory testing, or stores the results of laboratory testing, must be validated to ensure that it meets its intended use, that it operates as you intended it to operate, which means you have to identify how you intend it to operate, and that it consistently performs within pre-established operational limits. If your assay has a limit to the number of samples that can be run at one time, or has temperature limits, you need to show that your system will maintain those limits as long as it has to. So some common findings, and I reviewed findings over the last 3 years, and there's some very definite common findings in the laboratory environment, and these things appear over and over again on 483s and again in warning letters. And reviewing these warning letters and 483s is a really good way to understand what the FDA is currently interested in. What are they currently looking at? For a long time, they didn't even look at software. They didn't look at Part 11 requirements, but the number of Part 11 483s is on the rise. So looking at these current trends and applying findings to your own lab can increase compliance for your laboratory operations and ensure that you're not going to be caught by surprise in an audit situation. Understanding what the FDA is looking for can help give you a heads up in preparing for and surviving that audit, because you can have the proper documentation at hand. You know what the FDA is looking for. You're not going to be caught by surprise. So some of the common findings that we've seen are the failure to establish written procedures. This is one of the most common problems we see in a laboratory situation, and one of the most common things that the FDA is finding. And as a matter of fact, 4 of the 7 most common violations fall into that category. Other common observations include the responsibilities of the quality control unit are not written, or they're not fully followed. Manufacturer fails to investigate out-of-specification batches, including both released and rejected batches. So you may have released batches, you may have had aberrant results, and they were released anyway. And that your laboratory controls are not validated. Some of these findings lead very directly to warning letters. And there's a couple of them that I know we happen to have an FDA inspector on staff. And I asked him some of the findings that he had that did result in warning letters. And some of those in a laboratory situation are the fact that the equipment that you use in manufacture, processing, packing, holding of drug products is not designed to facilitate the operation for its intended use. So you may have spectrophotometers, balances. They're not qualified to demonstrate their suitability in the manufacture of product. Again, that goes back to there's no written procedures that document equipment qualification and how to qualify it for its intended use. Deviations from written production and process control procedures are not recorded and justified. You must perform a formal investigation if you have deviations from written controls. Why wasn't it followed? What's the result? Is it wrong? Maybe the procedure is not correct at this point. Maybe the operator is going and doing their own thing. But you have to find out why a deviation from that procedure happened. You need to have a process in place to address that. It could be retraining. It could be updating the procedure to ensure that the processes are followed. Another one, no written procedures for cleaning and maintenance of equipment used in packaging, processing, holding of a drug product. Written procedures, once again, using an incorrect solvent, a solvent that has not been qualified to use in a process. All of those things are serious. These are very simple pieces of equipment. They're simple things to put a procedure in place to clean, how to adequately clean, what kind of solvents you use to clean and what you can't use to clean. All of that needs to be written down and it needs to be followed. I know that this slide here is kind of an eye chart, but again, I sort of segregated some of the common FDA findings. The quality assurance unit does not fulfill the requirements of the regulations. The quality unit failed to monitor the management of facilities, lack of validation of laboratory methods, lack of validation reviews. You are required to do periodic reviews of validations to ensure that they continue to meet their intended use over a period of time. And over a period of time, as you start to make changes to laboratory systems or any systems for that matter, you could inadvertently change the original intended use. So periodically, you need to look at systems and look at the big picture. Look at how many changes were made. Look at help desk tickets, how many complaints came. Is there any trend in the number of complaints after a particular package was updated? So that you can have a much bigger picture. And it may be that the results of those periodic reviews say that we're still in compliance and we're good, or it may be that you may recommend some regression testing or additional testing be done to ensure that you are in compliance and that the system's working the way you need it to. Equipment management, failure to adequately inspect, clean, and maintain equipment. Inadequate written procedures. Again, inadequate procedures to conduct your business. On documentation, a lack of SOPs adequate to ensure control and quality, and also to ensure integrity of the data. Lack of SOPs for internal processes. Again, documentation. Failure to properly store specimens and data. So just because data is sitting on your hard drive on a single workstation does not mean it's safe. You need to take adequate measures to protect that data, to back it up, to ensure that you can restore it if need be. Training. Unqualified or underqualified personnel. Insufficient external training was a 483 finding. Now, there's not really any requirement to have external training. However, in this particular case, the auditor felt that external training was required and it didn't happen. And the training of personnel and consultants, you cannot forget your consultants. Your consultants must also be adequately trained to do the job that you're asking them to do. So how do you avoid a 483? And better yet, how do you avoid a warning letter? There's really not a simple way. 483s are findings. They come from personal observations made during an inspection by an inspector. That inspector makes his own judgment calls sometimes. They're following the regulations, but they may be interpreting the regulations also. So there's really not a simple way to avoid a 483 observation. But some of the things you can do is make sure that your processes are in compliance before the FDA gets there. Your quality unit should be doing internal inspections, internal audits to see that the lab is in compliance, that people are following procedures, and that adequate procedures exist. It's critical to make sure that your quality assurance unit has the tools that it needs to conduct audits before the FDA arrives. Those internal audits are not subject to FDA inspection. So you can find the problem and correct it before it's found and documented. Once the FDA arrives, the QA unit needs to be enabled and empowered to react swiftly and respond swiftly at the inspection. An unannounced 483 follow-up inspection can be conducted at any time. They do not need to tell you they are coming. They often do tell you, but they don't have to. If you get a 483, it's critical to give a very thorough response right away, as soon as possible, to each and every 483. If you get a complaint from a patient or a medical practitioner or a client, if you're making API and you provide product to other vendors or other manufacturers, and you receive a complaint, you need to do a thorough investigation and document that investigation, because those are the types of things that can result in product-related inspections, quality-related inspections. Make sure your laboratory controls are scientifically sound. Make sure your sampling procedures for how you sample product are scientifically sound. They need to have a scientific basis. Just taking 3 samples from the beginning, middle, and end without a scientific basis for doing that and testing those samples may or may not ensure that you've done a good job of sampling an entire lot of product. Your test procedures need to be designed and validated to ensure that the components and drug results conform to standards of identity, strength, quality, and purity. And sometimes you need to identify what those parameters are, and you need to have adequate data to support that. If you release an out-of-specification or contaminated product, you are going to increase the likelihood of expanding and extending for cause an FDA inspection. If they come in and they discover that, they're going to look deeper. The FDA will cite underlying GMP violations when they're investigating a failed product release. But remember that we said very often it's not a failed product that comes in. It may be a failed product that initiates an inspection, but it could be a standard inspection, a periodic inspection. But if you have a failed product or a recall, you can almost guarantee the FDA will be there to help you investigate that. Make sure that you have adequate written programs and schedules for your calibration and maintenance of all your laboratory equipment and instrumentation. Make sure that you have adequate approved procedures for the laboratory processes, and not only that you have them, that people are aware of where they're located, they can get to them from the laboratory, they are trained on them, and that they are followed. Just because there's not a known problem or a customer complaint with released product is no guarantee of a safety from a 483. It may give you less of a chance of being audited in the first place, but again, it's your processes that the FDA is coming in to look at. As the FDA wrote in one warning letter, the lack of current customer complaints alone is neither a verification of a robust quality system nor that you have appropriate process controls in place. You could be making product all day long that passes its acceptance criteria, that gets released to the public, but that doesn't mean that the processes and the procedures that you have in place are adequate to support that process. Responding to a 483 or a warning letter is serious business. You should not be taken lightly. If you don't respond, it results in fines, recalls, injunctions, and worse. If you continue to fail to respond, the fines can only get bigger, and then you may also potentially be looking at that gray bar hotel. And my understanding is even the best gray bar hotel is not a very nice place to go. A warning letter that focuses on GMP issues that are found are not necessarily typically issued right after an inspection. So if you've had a poor inspection, if you've received a 483, if you receive findings, address those findings right away. You will have some opportunity here, some period of time to revisit the findings, the observations, and to address them and prevent bad findings from turning into a warning letter. Usually the FDA is going to give you a chance by giving you these 483 findings first, and they're going to request your responses. They can and do issue warning letters regardless of the response. However, they won't issue a warning letter unless they believe there are serious GMP issues and a failure to respond properly and or promptly. And again, we have kind of an eye chart here, but when you're responding to the findings, be timely. Make sure your responses meet the 15-day deadline. Demonstrate your willingness to comply with and understand the regulations. Tell them that you understand and that you will comply with what they've asked, if you feel that that's appropriate. A response can be that you do not believe that the finding was appropriate, but you need to explain why and do your due diligence in responding to that also. You can't just ignore something that you don't believe is true. Respond to every item on the form with a corrective action and a time frame for completing that action, and make it a reasonable time frame. It can't be unreasonably long, but it should not be unreasonably short so that you miss it. Because if you miss it, that's a failure. Prioritize your responses by addressing the most quality-related issues first so that you have the best possible response for the most serious findings. Keep a positive tone. Don't point fingers at the FDA. Don't call his mother names. Make sure that your tone is positive throughout your response, and indicate how you think you can improve your quality system from the findings that you've gotten. If you have reference documents, be sure to indicate those in your response. For instance, if you've obtained employee agreements or purchase agreements in response to a finding, make sure that you reference those and talk about the fact that you've gotten those now. Make sure that you understand the finding before the inspector leaves your site. The inspectors are trained that they should give all critical findings and report all findings to the most qualified person on your inspection team, on your company inspection team, at the end of every inspection. They are trained to do that, but it's up to you as the company being inspected to make sure at the beginning of an inspection that you request that from the inspector also. And you should sit down with the inspector at the close of every business day, understand the findings that they have, ask questions. Don't hesitate to ask them to further clarify. That's what they're supposed to do. So that when the inspector leaves, you know what the findings are, you have the 483, and you can begin to address them without further clarification. That's going to help you in making sure that you issue timely, appropriate responses. I just put together a few of the references that I've used. This will be posted up on our website. And Becky, I'll turn it over to you in case anybody has any questions. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Thank you, Diane. We appreciate that tremendous information and helping us not to be so afraid of the 483s, right? And know how to deal with them or to avoid them to start with. So we will open the floor to questions now, and while you're typing those in, I would like to let you know that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on the website, again, USDM.com. Many of you are familiar with USDM capabilities in compliance projects, but did you know that USDM offers 3 separate delivery options? Our project team, of course, supports start-to-finish compliance, and it's led by an SME practice director like Diane, or project managers with those specific skills. And we utilize the USDM team members with various skill sets for cost effectivity. So for instance, you don't need a project manager writing your documents or working with testing, et cetera. So we work very creatively to offer not only excellence in compliance, but strong competitive pricing as well. Based on your preferences, we can be flexible with our availability to work on-site or remotely. So good to know there. If you need extra hands to help you meet project deadlines, USDM staff augmentation supports your internally managed projects with our strong team members that have the skills and experience specifically needed for your project, whether it's 6 weeks or 6 months, on-site, off-site. Let us know what you need and we can work with you there. And the overall goal for USDM is client delight, which of course is going to result in repeat business, right? Majority of our clients have been with us for many years with many projects across many practices. And the way we achieve that is by helping you to meet your compliance goals and being prepared when the FDA knocks on your door, right? So the third option is USDM On Demand, and that's a blended on-site, onshore, offshore model, and it's for managed services, development and support, and for validation testing. Consider, validation testing center of excellence type model. And this approach incorporates the cost savings of offshoring while reducing risk, ensuring higher success than the traditional offshore model. So consider those, and if you have more questions about that or want a little information, just check out our website or give me a call. I would like to encourage you to visit the USDM website and review upcoming webinars and events as well as our recorded sessions of previously presented topics that may be useful for you and your team in compliance space. So our first question looks like it's from Kevin. Let's see. Can you provide advice or guidance in responding to FDA 483s? Is that the kind of thing your firm does?
We can. We absolutely have a number of specialty people here. So regardless of the area that a 483 is received in, we can provide expert guidance in helping you to respond to those, in helping you to develop the timelines and the process that you need to put in place for the response. And then we can also help remediate the 483s as you go along.
Good, good, good. Okay, Susan would like to know, can you provide advice or guidance in responding to an FDA 483? Is that the kind of thing your firm does?
I think that was the same question.
The same question. Yeah, because a lot of people want to know, what do we do when we get the 483, right? Oh, that's great. Okay, so let's move on to a question from Robert. Does USDM offer auditing services to audit our laboratory operations and assure FDA inspection readiness? Need to identify gaps which may need to be remediated to avoid 483. Okay.
We have a practice within USDM. It's our quality auditing practice, and that practice offers a full range of auditing services from PAIs to lab internal audits to vendor audits to supplier audits. So yes, we can offer auditing services to help your quality staff or augment your quality staff implement their internal audit processes and identify all of those gaps prior to an FDA inspector coming on site.
Tremendous, Tremendous. Okay, looks like some more are coming there. Give me one moment.
I see one from Johanna.
Thank you.
What do you mean by segregated QCs? Can they be in the same box with the standards? Yeah, your QCs, they can be. They just need to be properly labeled. You need to be able to easily identify them. Typically, we'll see them stored separately, but if you have them in the same box as your standards, as long as they're well labeled and easy to identify, that's fine.
Very good. Thank you, Diane. Okay, looks like we have a question from a competitor. Yes, we are in favor of training our competitors because they know that we know our stuff. But sorry, I can't ask that question online. We will not do commercials for you. Okay. That's funny. Okay, very good. Well, it looks like, folks, that we need to be wrapping up. We're coming up on a quarter of the hour. And again, thank you all for taking the time to join us today. And we would invite you again to join our USDM group discussion and stay connected with us there. We do post notices about upcoming webinar presentations that could be valuable for you and additional team nights. We welcome your feedback. We do like to know if we're on the right track, and your feedback helps us to know what pain points that you'd like us to help you address. If you're having any struggles or specific questions, we're happy to answer them in presentations across the different practices. Let us know that that you appreciate the information that we're sharing here, and if you have topics, let us know what you need to learn. Okay, and we can help you there and at least share our experience and capabilities in that area. Thank you, Diane, again. Thanks for presenting today. And thank you all for taking the time to join us. We do appreciate this opportunity to team with you and working towards excellence in compliance. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.